In 1879, in the industrial quarters of London, USA, 23-year-old Isabella Turner was found standing barefoot on the frost-lined steps of the First Reformed Chapel, her dress damp with condensation, clutching a folio of parish records defaced by indecipherable script. She was shivering but spoke calmly, fluently, switching between 12 languages no one could identify. Witnesses from the congregation remembered her as quiet, devout and unmarried, with a habit of copying sermons by hand with almost obsessive precision. But over a few weeks, her notations shifted, filling the church's ledgers with looping alphabets and phonetic clusters that resisted translation. Following complaints, her employer at the municipal court submitted her for mental evaluation, but physicians were divided. Some blamed hysteria, others suspected fraud. London's paper mills reeked of sulphur that winter, and across town, census clerks began flagging entries altered with symbols matching Turner's notes. By June, 3 government translators had resigned. What did Isabella Turner actually write? The earliest records of concern date back to March 1879, in the handwritten maintenance logs of the London Municipal Court. A note entered by janitor Elmer Hatch, dated the 14th, complained of a persistent tapping sound behind the south file cabinet, lasting between the hours of 7 and 9 each morning. Hatch, a man not known for embellishment, also described sheets of legal stationery discarded without use, ink spent, but no visible writing. The entry, buried between inventory requests and cleaning schedules, drew no attention at the time. She was appointed through a city vocational program for young women, earning 72 cents a day transcribing council minutes. Her station faced the outer window, giving her a view of the snow-capped lumberyard across Chestnut Avenue. By all external measures, she was an ideal hire, quiet, precise, obedient. Her posture was admired by the stenographer, Mr. Eddings, who once remarked that she sat as if the chair were borrowed from a judge's bench. She never missed a day. Rather than joining the others at the rear stairwell for tea, Isabella remained at her desk, scribbling not on fresh sheets, but over faded documents retrieved from the disposal bin. Bell later recalled the sound of Isabella's pen, not the usual gliding strokes of transcription, but a pressing rhythm, short and sharp, like someone trying to carve a message into the page. Once a week, always on a Monday, Turner's trash bin contained shredded paper rolled so tightly it had to be cut open. These shredded bundles were moist to the touch, stained with what appeared to be boot polish or burned wax. The janitor reported one bundle that contained cloth fibers, as if the page had been used to scrub fabric. He did not file a formal complaint, but mentioned it to the security man, who filed an informal memo that was misdated and misfiled, resurfacing only in 1885. Turner occupied the smallest room at the top of the stairs, which measured 6 feet by 10, with a single window and a view of the Methodist bell tower. Mrs. Chilton, who kept a strict curfew, noted that Isabella no longer lit her oil lamp in the evenings, but instead wrote by candlelight, the smoke of which would sometimes stain the hallway wallpaper. When questioned, Turner responded calmly, saying only, "Candlelight reveals what ink cannot." She left 20 minutes earlier than necessary, passing the court entirely, only to circle back after first walking to the edge of the riverfront, where she stood facing the water for exactly 8 minutes each time. An officer with the Street Commission noted her presence in a city patrol log, young woman with court documents, standing motionless by the iron railing near Bridge No. 3, not begging, not weeping, possibly reciting. The replacements bore authentic seals and dates, but the content had changed. Brodie, trained in Latin and Greek, could identify no known language in the symbols used. Some bore resemblance to phonetic alphabets, others to musical notation, but the structure was inconsistent. He raised the issue discreetly with the chief archivist, who insisted the matter be kept internal. He did not protest. Turner returned shortly after noon, claiming she had attended Mass, though no one at the First Reformed Chapel had seen her. When spoken to, she responded in what sounded like prayer, but none of the deacons could identify the psalms. A few noted that the cadence of her speech was unnatural. "A beat too fast," one said. Another described it as the sound of someone racing through a sermon with no breath. The administrator, Charles Duval, consulted with a private physician, Dr. Henry Alcott, who agreed to a discreet evaluation. Turner was summoned for an informal interview. During their discussion, she remained composed, answering questions clearly, but when asked to write her name for record, she filled an entire page with vertical strokes and circular glyphs. Dr. Alcott later wrote, "The subject presents no outward signs of hysteria or delusion. However, her cognitive pattern, particularly in written form, diverges entirely from recognizable logic or language structure. She may be in the midst of a neurological transformation or, more likely, an undisclosed system of communication." The page Turner had written on was stored in Alcott's desk, where it remained until his death in 1903. The change was caught by a mid-level supervisor who believed it to be an error in transcription. When asked to explain, Turner looked past him and said, "Those names were not correct. This is what they are now." The supervisor did not escalate the issue, but he annotated the entry with a question mark and his initials. The handwriting did not match Turner's. One complained of headaches localized to the temples. Another said the pages gave off a faint smell, like heated copper. One clerk swore that when she stacked the documents, the margins lined up into continuous columns of marks, though she could never replicate it. Inside was a single folded sheet, filled with the same unfamiliar glyphs Isabella had scribbled months earlier. He recognized the patterns immediately and burned the letter. That same day, the municipal court experienced a clerical malfunction. 22 files went missing from the criminal archive. Each had passed through Turner's desk within the last 2 weeks. When the files were recovered a day later, placed neatly inside a locked cabinet in the wrong wing, every third page had been altered with faint secondary inscriptions, marks barely visible under angled light, as if written with a dry brush. When refilled, it separated again within hours, leaving behind a residue that stained fingers a dark bronze. A technician was brought in and found nothing mechanically wrong. Turner was not present that day. She had sent word from her boarding house claiming dizziness and nausea. When Mrs. Chilton brought her a compress, she found Isabella sitting on the floor, surrounded by open books with no titles and ink pooled in a glass bowl beside her. She had painted a series of symbols on the floorboards around her legs. When asked, Turner simply said, "This is how it's organized now." It was only the content, increasingly, that no longer matched what had been dictated. Duval ordered a secondary scribe to review all her transcripts. Within days, the assistant fell behind, unable to keep pace, citing constant corrections and inconsistencies that looped back on themselves. By the end of the week, the assistant resigned. Meanwhile, the local paper mill reported a spike in unclaimed orders for parchment, many of them billed to the city under obscure clerical codes. An accountant traced the authorization to files bearing Turner's signature, but in the wrong format. Her name had been written backward, letter by letter, but the signature passed inspection. The accountant, a methodical man named Gerard Hoyle, asked for a meeting with her. When she arrived, she placed a folded sheet on his desk and waited. Hoyle described what happened next in a sworn statement, later archived under sealed court review. "I was overcome with the sensation that if I opened it, I would forget something urgent, something I'd promised to do that morning, though I no longer remembered what. I handed the paper back and told her I had made a mistake in summoning her. She smiled, not warmly. For years the bell had rung consistently each morning at 6, but in late August it began chiming at irregular hours, sometimes in the middle of the night. The church's custodian, Mr. Rawls, checked the mechanism repeatedly and found no fault. He noted in the maintenance log that one night at precisely 2:04 a.m. the bell rang 12 times. He checked the tower immediately and found the rope unpulled, the bell still swaying. The log entry ended with a personal note. "I'm less certain of sound than I once was." Finch's report, later discovered in a locked drawer of the archivist's desk, offered precise observations for 3 days. Then, in increasingly fragmented handwriting, his notes turned disjointed. In some cases, the handwriting did not match. One elderly couple said they had seen the court girl pass by their stoop at dawn, speaking to herself in a fast-clipped rhythm. "She looked straight ahead," the wife recalled. "She wasn't in a hurry, but her feet moved like she didn't need to decide where to go, like the street was answering her." Each thought itself the sole site of confusion. Only the librarian at the State Historical Hall began to suspect otherwise. Mrs. Eleanora Greaves had catalogued a growing collection of unmatched documents, all of which bore unfamiliar script, all filed between June and September. She pulled the files, reviewed them for commonalities, and noted not just the characters but the cadence. Many of the passages followed a 12-syllable pattern broken by 3 symbols that repeated, always at the end. Perhaps a cipher, or a very private invented script, he suggested, not unheard of among patients with fixation disorders. In the notes, she added a question not meant for classification. Are we still speaking, or have we just been repeating what she began? Her pen never left her hand even during lunch breaks, which she began to spend in complete silence, eyes fixed not on the page, but slightly above it. It is possessions opposite. He arrived in London, USA, on October 10, 1879, accompanied by a single leather-bound journal and a portable magnifier. He had received a circular report summarizing Turner's alterations to court documents, coded as persistent deviance in civil transcription protocol. No mention was made of language. He met first with Archivist Duval, then with Reverend Martin, both of whom provided carefully measured statements. Duval offered 5 examples of Turner's altered transcripts, none of which contained the symbols previously reported. Reverend Martin, when pressed, stated that the young woman speaks often and fluently, but not in ways I'm confident I'm hearing. Arliss noted both responses as evasive under institutional pressure. The marks formed a spiral, radiating outward from the municipal court, reaching as far as the eastern rail yard. Someone's inserted a new layer beneath the old one. It's not erasure, it's something else. He received a telegram from his superior in Albany, instructing him to return and resubmit in person. He did not reply. After attending one Sunday service where Turner was present, he recorded that she did not speak during the sermon, but remained completely still, mouth slightly open. Keene described the sensation of hearing a recitation with no audible voice emanating from her direction. He left the church pale and declined to enter again. He had attempted to transcribe what he believed to be a sound from Turner's lips, 3 syllables repeated in a breath-like rhythm. He wrote them phonetically, but the syllables changed each time he tried to write them. I no longer trust that the pen is mine, he concluded. The metal typeset shattered on impact, despite no sign of obstruction. The damage was so severe that the rotary cylinder had to be replaced. When examined, the line of text that triggered the failure did not match the manuscript. The printed line had duplicated itself 6 times, forming a complete row of mirrored symbols. The metallurgist found no flaws in the plate, but noted an odd corrosion where the ink had been densest. As if the characters had weight, he wrote, as if they dragged the surface down. Marsden returned to find his office had been rearranged. The drawers of his desk had been inverted, files filed upside down, and every pen in the inkwell stood vertically, suspended unnaturally without support. No one admitted to entering the room. Outside the official structures, public curiosity began to grow. The London Gazette ran a column titled "Courtroom Polyglot. Strange Notations Raise Questions." It included a grainy portrait of Turner, sketched by a courthouse sketch artist. The artist later complained that the drawing process had been unusually slow. His hand moved independently, as though trying to trace something not visible. His final comment was redacted from the article, but preserved in a side note. She draws you even when you're drawing her. The first reporter wrote a string of consonants, the second fragments of old Latin phrases. When they compared, neither could recall the other's words being said. One left the city the next morning. The other stayed another week and fell ill, reporting blurred vision and nausea whenever near courthouse materials. He was last seen asking for an index of pre-written languages, which did not exist. Felix Arliss, undeterred by the Bureau's silence, requested access to Turner's desk during her off hours. He was granted 1 hour. The contents were orderly: a stack of completed court filings, several bundles of correspondence tied with string, and a sealed envelope labeled "For When the Words Close." Arliss did not open it. Instead, he took one completed filing and attempted to match it against the original complaint. The dates aligned, the case number was correct, but the content had been rewritten in full. The subject of the complaint, an ordnance violation regarding livestock, was now a meditation on architecture and structure, rendered entirely in unknown script. I felt my hearing change. The room became quiet, too quiet. Then I could hear the outside but not inside. It's like she moved the room slightly away from itself. Prospective boarders left quickly, citing an odd stillness, a thick quality in the air as though the walls absorbed breath. One woman, a traveling governess from Indiana, claimed the room had a memory that didn't match the window. She did not elaborate. Across the collar, words had been written in 4 directions, forming a grid. She brought it to the First Reformed Chapel, where Reverend Martin refused to touch it. He instructed her to burn it, but when she returned home, the cloth was no longer in her possession. She did not remember where she'd placed it. Duval testified, as did 2 other clerks. All 3 gave measured, neutral statements. Not one of them mentioned language. Not one mentioned the script. When asked whether Turner's work showed deviation, Duval stated, "Her fidelity to form is absolute." It is not clear who said it, but the transcriptionist marked it with a line break and an asterisk in the margin. The script matched the one found in Turner's altered documents, but this instance included standard numerals, 4 dates arranged in descending order. The last date was October 27th, 3 days away. The note was passed to the office supervisor, who filed it as a prank. Within an hour, the file was missing. No one recalled moving it. Dressed in court attire with a black shawl drawn tight over her shoulders, a neighbor saw her step onto the cobblestone street and begin walking steadily toward the river. She did not carry a satchel. Her hands were empty. Yet 2 separate witnesses later described her silhouette as weighted, as if she bore a burden that remained unseen. A constable on night patrol spotted her and approached. His name was Officer Klein, and he would later file a statement. He said she was whispering something too fast to catch, not English, not even syllables he could recognize. When he asked her name, she turned slowly and said in perfect legal phrasing, "I am in the act of rendering a transcription." He escorted her back to Lambert Street without further incident. She thanked him, though he could not recall her mouth moving. However, the facing page, previously filled with notes on Turner, had been entirely erased. Only the indentations remained. A rubbing was taken, revealing a faint spiral pattern similar to the one Arliss had found in Turner's altered complaint form. Around the name, a ring of symbols had been added, drawn so tightly they pressed into the page's edge. A note was attached, unsigned. "She is not saying it. She is becoming it." An entire wing of floor-to-ceiling cabinets fell forward in a cascading motion, damaging over 400 records. Turner's desk was untouched, even though it stood directly adjacent. The custodial crew reported that the area around her chair had remained completely free of dust or debris. One remarked that it seemed the dust itself had refused to settle near her. It contained a perfect rendering of the city's grid, but with 12 additional streets marked, none of which existed. The new streets followed no logical naming system. Instead, each bore a single character from the unknown script. Turner made no comment when the sheet was shown to her. She turned it upside down and slid it back across the table. She submitted documents, attended hearings, copied transcripts. Her notes, however, were no longer legible. Not even the formatting remained. Spacing, indentations, line breaks, all of it collapsed into blocks of dense, dark print, with no clear beginning or end. Supervisors grew concerned but hesitated to act. When Duval convened a private panel to consider suspension, he found the meeting room rearranged upon arrival. Every chair had been turned to face the wall. A sheet of correspondence lay on the table, unsigned, undated, and written entirely in Turner's script. A midwife claimed her newborn had produced a guttural syllable within hours of birth, one that matched a sound she'd heard from Turner on the courthouse steps. A merchant reported that his order invoices, when left near her filed documents, began to shift ink positions, lettering migrating over time without any visible alteration. A schoolteacher, Miss Clara Humes, made a formal complaint after one of her students brought home a page from the city archive, claiming his father had used it to insulate a drawer. The page was covered in symbols, and the child had begun copying them. By the 3rd day, he was muttering in his sleep. Miss Humes burned the page and filed an incident with the Board of Education. Her complaint was logged, then lost. A new page appeared in the archive the next day, bearing the child's full name rendered in unfamiliar characters. When her identification tag went missing, it was not replaced. Yet no one revoked her access. She continued to work unimpeded. In early December, the court received a formal letter from the Bureau of Civil Irregularities. It acknowledged Alice's disappearance and announced the appointment of a new investigator, Joseph Larch, to take over his files. Larch arrived with 2 porters and requested all documents touched by Turner be brought to the public hall for review. The request was denied. The files had already been moved, but no one could confirm by whom. The storage location listed in the registry no longer existed. It had been replaced with a new entry, written in Turner's hand, directing inquiries to the silent record. According to the stenographer stationed nearby, no sound emerged from the room for the duration of the interview. When Larch exited, he looked visibly unwell. He walked to the rail station, purchased a return ticket, and left without collecting his belongings. His statement was never submitted. The final sentence read, "She is not transcribing, she is emitting." Turner's pages resisted duplication. The ink faded when copied. The marks smudged themselves on transfer. Greaves placed the volumes on a separate shelf and locked them in a steel cabinet. When she returned the next morning, the cabinet was empty. The shelf bore a single slip of paper with 12 characters written vertically. The decision followed mounting internal reports of structural instability, cracking floorboards, the repeated warping of filing cabinets, and the unexplained loss of archival heat despite repairs. No maintenance crew had entered the sub-level in over a year. The entrance to the annex was not visible from the main corridor. It lay behind a false partition once used to store out-of-circulation forms. The partition had been sealed with plaster, yet on that morning it was found ajar, as if something had pressed against it from the inside. The smell was heavy and unfamiliar, oil mixed with salt and something fainter, like iron filings ground into cloth. Most matched the characters from Turner's documents, but others were irregular, rushed, some carved with tools, others scraped with fingernails. None of them glowed, none of them moved, but they pulled the eye in like vanishing points, drawing focus away from everything else. Inside they found what had once been the city's overflow storage, 20 feet by 20, low ceiling, no windows, but it had been transformed. In the center of the room was a desk constructed from file drawers, hammered together. On it sat 4 open ledgers, ink pots dried and cracked, brushes arranged tip-up in a glass tumbler. A chair, low-backed, faced the desk. Its cushion was worn into the shape of a single seated body. It had once been a court clerk's robe, now dyed entirely black and marked with rows of minute script. It was cut along the hem into uneven panels, each marked with a date. Some of the dates lay in the future. About halfway through he stopped. The characters began to mirror themselves, forming pairs that looped inward. Then, abruptly, the pages turned blank. He flipped further. The last 10 pages of the book were filled with sketches of human mouths in various positions, lips parted, teeth shown, tongues contorted, each labeled with a single unfamiliar symbol. The drawings had been rendered in red ink. That afternoon, the mayor's office authorized a restricted perimeter around the court building. The public was informed of foundation safety inspections. Few questioned the official story. By then, most citizens had noticed the courthouse lights flickering irregularly at night, and a number of residents on Lambert Street had complained of headaches and metallic taste in their mouths. Over the next 2 days, 6 additional personnel were brought in to examine the chamber beneath the court. Among them was the city surveyor, an architect, and 2 legal clerks trained in historical transcription. They catalogued 48 bound volumes. Each volume had different content. One appeared to be a record of municipal births, but the names listed were not in English. Another resembled a tax ledger, but every sum equaled 0. A third volume contained hundreds of short declarative statements, each written in a different hand. A few matched handwriting samples from current court employees, statements they swore never to have written. Our central corridor extended from the courthouse toward the river, terminating in a circle of 12 marks. No explanation was given. On the back of the map, written in English, was one phrase: This was always underneath. His hands had been stained with ink, though he had not held a pen in days. When questioned, he repeated a single phrase, "We are echoing the first attempt," until sedated. Inside was a single page torn from Turner's early ledger. On it was a drawing of the courthouse surrounded by empty streets, each labeled with glyphs. No people were shown. It bore no stains, no scent, no signs of wear. A note was pinned to the sleeve. It read, "Final submission prepared in silence." The final page described a sound, a low pulsing tone without a source that seemed to originate from the spines of the bound volumes. He noted that the air inside the chamber had grown dry, with a faint current running across the floor, as if breath were being drawn inward from an unseen mouth. The following morning, the room beneath the annex was sealed permanently by order of the mayor's office. Steel plating was installed over the corridor entrance. The city issued no public statement. Each symbol had previously been found on Turner's ledgers. Each document was filed without any employee admitting to having written or seen it. Eleanor Greaves of the State Historical Hall received a visitor she would later describe as a city official or someone styled to resemble one. The man presented no identification but wore a black wool coat with a courthouse seal stitched in pale thread on the cuff, an outdated version no longer in circulation. He requested access to the rare manuscripts chamber. Greaves, despite regulation, allowed him entry. He asked specifically for the locked cabinet where Turner's 6 missing volumes had been stored. When she informed him they were gone, he did not react. Instead, he removed a small notepad and wrote down 3 names, each a former clerk, now deceased, and asked for their handwriting samples. He walked without scuffing. I felt I had already met him. This message coincided with an unexplainable failure of the courthouse's north wing heating system. All radiators along that corridor stopped functioning simultaneously. Engineers found no mechanical faults. When they drained the water from the pipes, it came out thickened, not frozen but gelatinous, smelling faintly of ink. A section of the pipe interior had been lined with script, etched into the metal surface in shallow relief. The engravings matched the characters in Turner's ledgers. The papers had yellowed with age, many fused by damp and compression, but some remained legible. They included fragments of Turner's earliest submissions, documents believed to have been filed correctly, now altered. One invoice, previously a boiler inspection notice, had become a treatise on intervals of silence. Another, a work order for ink delivery, listed as its cargo. 2 measures of sequence, 1 jar of intent, 6 spools of listening. A library assistant at the London Athenaeum found a misfiled book in the children's section, a slim volume with blank pages, save one in the middle. The page showed a drawing of the courthouse rendered in pencil, perfectly proportional. Around the spire, 12 small birds had been sketched in a circle. Each bird had no eyes. Beneath the drawing, in block script, "This was our first letter." It had been stamped through February 2nd, 6 days after she had last been seen. The initials on the final stamp were unfamiliar, and the ink used was not black but a deep violet grey, almost reflective. The boarding house had remained closed to new tenants since October. Mrs. Chilton, suspecting an animal intrusion, ascended the staircase and stood outside the room. The door was locked. Inside, she heard movement, a rhythmic pattern, not walking, but pacing in place, always returning to the same spot. Instead, she notified Reverend Martin, who was recovering but frail. He came the next day, accompanied by a junior deacon. They entered the room together. The desk drawer contained no ink, no paper, only a single worn book, a city directory with every name crossed out except one. By mid-February, 3 more city departments reported irregularities in documentation, misaligned forms, missing names, duplicated numbers. Each case, upon inspection, revealed a page or segment that did not match typographically with the rest. The ink tone varied, the pressure of the print inconsistent. Under magnification, archivists noted micro-inscriptions within the page fibers themselves, visible only under gaslight at a particular angle. These inscriptions, while not legible in full, matched visual markers from Turner's earlier ledgers. On the final Sunday of the month, Reverend Martin delivered a short sermon titled stillness as declaration. He read from a single sheet of paper. Those in attendance said it was not in English. The tone of his voice shifted throughout, high to low, speeding and slowing without pattern. One witness claimed to feel as though the ceiling had lowered slightly. Another wept without understanding why. After the service, the Reverend was taken to St. Elmo's and placed under observation. His room remained quiet, but when the nurse recorded her log the next morning, she noted that he had scratched several symbols into the frame of his bed using the corner of a spoon. It bore no return name, no postage, and was tied with courthouse string. Inside was a book bound in red cloth. Its title was embossed in unfamiliar script. The first page contained a dedication. For the next speaker, you will recognize the silence. 43 employees either resigned or transferred within a 4-month span. The court operated at reduced capacity. No official statement linked the exodus to Isabella Turner, nor to the materials discovered beneath the annex. But among city employees, her name became unspoken shorthand. One of hers, they would murmur when encountering documents with irregular spacing or unfamiliar phrasing. Entire case files were set aside for this reason, filed separately, marked not with labels but with colored thread. His statement to the press was brief. You cannot assess something that has already rewritten itself. He referred to them as contagious formats, layouts that erased their own margin lines during replication. He warned the reporter that these aren't texts, they're instructions for how to remain unsaid. Its members convened once on May 17th in Albany. Among the agenda items was the question of whether Turner had operated alone or as part of a broader network. The minutes from that meeting are missing. The committee was dissolved the next day without issuing any findings. Her wages, unpaid since January, were never reissued. The office responsible for payroll attempted to recover funds distributed in the final quarter of 1879. 3 letters were sent to her known address. All were returned. The envelopes bore postmarks from Boston, though none had left the county. His final recorded words, scribbled onto the margin of a hospital intake form, were, "She opened the sentence. It never closed." The chapel was closed for restoration later that year. In the restoration records, a carpenter noted finding a folded note tucked behind the base of the altar. It was unsigned, written in clean, formal English. Books continued to be misplaced, logged under topics no one remembered researching. Pre-verbal systems, architectures of silence, ghostless records. But the sender, recipient, and subject lines were all written using Turner's format. The student, believing it a prank, attempted to decode the first letter. Within days, he withdrew from his studies and traveled to Canada without explanation. He left behind only one note, written hastily in Latin. Its last line was circled twice. Between 1886 and 1888, state archivists undertook a reorganization of civic records across the region. In London, they encountered repeated anomalies, missing dates, duplicated numbers, irregular seals. When auditors attempted to match documents to original entries, several pages did not align. The line spacing had shifted. In some instances, pages from different years appeared to have been overwritten by the same pen. When pressed, no one could say who had last handled them. Its windows were painted over from the inside. On several occasions, passers-by reported seeing lights flicker within, though the building had been disconnected from gas lines months earlier. It cited a series of unsourced documents from an unnamed Midwestern municipality. The central claim that within certain administrative systems, language could become recursive, no longer describing events but generating them. The article was later discredited. No publication ever confirmed submitting it. But on certain mornings, when the fog hung low over the river and the church bell rang off schedule, the clerks still paused. Some glanced toward the sealed annex. Others looked at their hands, unsure if they had just written something or been written by it. But everyone knew the warning, repeated each time it changed owners. The new documents included a list of employee assignments that did not correspond to any known department, and 3 pages filled with dense columns of numerals, 12 digits wide, repeating in irregular intervals. The city clerk who discovered the change brought it to his supervisor, but by the following day, the original folder had been restored. No record of the altered version was ever acknowledged. The supervisor dismissed it as a filing accident. The clerk resigned within the week. Measurements taken from within the building differed by several feet from those listed on the city's land survey. In one case, a room listed as 10 by 12 feet had no interior access, nor any visible doors or windows. The crew halted the project. The expansion was delayed, then quietly cancelled. The page would remain there for 1 hour, then be filed into a drawer labeled pending. No one ever spoke of who submitted it, but the tradition continued through at least 1895. During her interview, Bell remained reserved until asked about unusual patterns in archival documentation. She fell silent, then rose from her chair and retrieved a small box from her bedroom. Inside were 3 scraps of parchment, preserved between glass. Each bore a single line of symbols pressed into the page with such pressure that the paper was nearly split. I don't remember writing them, but the spacing is exactly how she used to format her declarations. It remained unmeasurable under chemical analysis. One janitor claimed to have heard sounds, soft tapping like the edge of a stylus against wood, on cold mornings just before dawn. He never investigated. The area was deemed off-limits. But one, bound in red linen, bore no label at all. Its contents, while formatted identically to attendance logs, listed no names, only dates, followed by phrases no translator could identify. Each phrase was precisely 12 syllables in length. No one could trace who packed the crate. Machines refused to print the unknown script. Carbon paper refused to copy it. Photographic plates returned only blank images. But among archivists, a new term emerged, Turner ink, used to describe any submission whose origin could not be verified, whose contents could not be explained, but which bore the unmistakable cadence of municipal speech, proper indentations, measured tone, silent authority. Others were shelved in unofficial collections, passed quietly among civil recorders. They were studied not for their content, but for their form. One analyst, in a private memo to a colleague, suggested that Turner's documents represented not a language, but a method of compression. Not for words, but for acts. The phrase he used, a bureaucracy of breath. Focused not on the artist, but beyond the frame. No copy was ever found. The symposium records show that Dr. Voss presented on mineral dialects instead. The seller reported that the page had once belonged to a courthouse assistant, though the name given was misspelled and untraceable. The catalogue entry was pulled before printing. The auction house did not respond to follow-up requests. Their ledger now lists the item as redeemed. But beneath the tile in the airless vault where no signal reaches, the books remain. If you made it to the end, it's because you also feel that these hidden truths must come to light. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. That way, we'll know how far these stories reach. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering them. This story was reconstructed from documents that were found. All names have been changed to protect the source.